we're going to switch a little bit and go purely into that objective view that I talked about, where you're the general on the hill, and you look down and see characters completely by their functions. You only see them as protagonist and antagonist and reason, emotion. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to list all of those different archetypes that we have. We've got the protagonist. There's 8 of them. Protagonist. They're in your book. And the antagonist, which we've already seen. And we have a reason, which I've talked about. And emotion. And then we have ones that Dramatica calls, and incorrectly, it's not so much incorrectly as it doesn't really capture the point of this character, but it's how it's most used in storytelling, which is odd for Dramatica to focus on storytelling. But the sidekick and the skeptic, we'll talk about them. And then we have the guardian and the contagonist. Contagonist is a word unique to Dramatica that filled a gap that we found in standard expectations of what characters do. Now, I call these archetypes. We talk about everything from Jungian archetypes, and you also have like the crone and the wise woman and all kinds of archetypes, the trickster, you know. And there's nothing wrong with using those. As a matter of fact, in the second day of our class, when we focus on passionate storytelling, you can choose any archetypes you want. In Storyweaver, the story weaving approach, you can use any archetypes you want, and they work just fine. But when we're looking at Dramatica's view of the story mind, a very objective and dry view, it looks at the functions that are represented in our own minds as being our basic 8 qualities. These are the driver qualities we have, and these are kind of the passenger qualities. These, in other words, are the ones that cause things to happen, and these are ones that modulate them. Okay? So these are modulators. This determines what the signal is, and this determines how it's adjusted, okay, in this second group. So we call them drivers and passengers between those two. Now, protagonist, our initiative. That represents our initiative. The desire to change something, desire to make progress, the desire to alter the situation, to change the status quo, for whatever reason. Whether it's good or bad, or doesn't matter. Whether if we know that it's going to cause trouble or not, doesn't matter. If we're going to change it, that makes us a protagonist. If we're trying to change the status quo. If we're trying to maintain the status quo, our reticence. There just aren't enough words in the English language. Later on, we get into this chart that we were looking at. You'll see all the different words that we have in here. And it took us 2 years to find enough words that were equally spaced in meaning to match how equally spaced they were in the chart. That was very, very difficult, especially considering when you look at the chart and you see that its real form is like this. The other one we've been looking at is compressed, okay? But this form here is how it is. So you have to have, like, for example, if you look at the chart, past is to universe as memory is to mind. Okay? And so everything in here has an equal relationship. That's how the story engine can work, by the way, is that when something has a certain distance, you can take that distance and the angle at which it's at, put it anywhere else, and have the same difference in meaning between those 2 items as there were here. So it's a 2-year project done on that part alone. Anyway, so with that, reticence is what we decided was the best way to describe that. But so we put down the definition. Antagonist is your reticence. Well, what the hell does that mean? Of course, you can look up the word, but what it basically means is maintaining things the way they are, or put things back the way they were. Let sleeping dogs lie, that kind of thing. Reason is pretty easy. It's our intellect, okay? We all have intellect. Some of it use it more than others, but when I say intellect, okay, I may misspell it, and that would be not using it. Anyway, it's kind of cyclic, you know, doesn't it all mirrors there? Okay, anyway, reason is our intellect, okay, and emotion is our feelings, how we feel about things. Now, you'll notice already we're seeing an interesting way of, I talked before about Crick and Watson and DNA. This is actually the crystalline form of a spiral. It's a quad helix, not a double helix like DNA. It's a quad helix because it takes into account the same kind of helix form you see in DNA with 2 more strands that represent the mind. Okay, so you end up with effectively a quad helix. It goes 1 dimension beyond what you can actually visualize. I'll give you an example of that later. It's very disturbing. But anyway, in doing that, you can see that it's going to have some twists in meaning that will occur as it goes around in this spiral. In other words, when you tell a story, you want to come back for closure, but you don't want to make a full circle. You want to make a full spiral so that you actually end up a point above or a point below where you started. Comparisons can be drawn, but you're no longer in the same place because now you have the value of your experience added to coming back to the same perspective to reevaluate it. So that's the function of time added into the function of coming back to spatial closure. If you take a spiral like that, a slinky, if you look at it from the end, it's a circle. That's when you say stories have to have closure. If you look at it from the side, it's a sine wave, and it shows you how time flies over time. A story has to be a spiral that's like a slinky, so that it has both a spatial component to show that you've reached closure by going back to the same subject matter, but at the same time, you have to have the temporal linear progression of experience that leads you to a new perspective on the same point. And when both of them are done together, it creates a spiral, and this is the crystalline form of that spiral, and that's all I'm going to tell you about that stuff because you can't possibly use it. But it's interesting to know. Okay. Now, when we get back to this here, you'll see that these going around the spiral causes a slight change in meaning. Antagonists and protagonists are like this, fighting against each other. Reason and emotion don't always fight against each other. Sometimes in real life, sometimes within ourselves, something feels right, and it makes a lot of sense. Other times something makes the most sense, but it doesn't feel good at all. Other times things feel so right, but they don't make sense. And sometimes, therefore, these things are diametrically opposed, sometimes they're hand in hand, and there can be any degree of thing in between. So a different kind of relationship exists between our intellect and our feelings than between our initiative and our reticence. Either we have initiative or we don't. They fight against each other. It's binary. It's going to be one or the other or somewhere along between them, but these might come together or they might move apart. So it's a different kind of relationship. Now, sidekick and skeptic, sidekick is kind of a cheerleader, basically. It's the cheerleader within ourselves. The part of ourselves that says, you know, I think I can do this. It's belief in oneself, basically. Not confidence necessarily, but it's sort of like, yeah, I think you're on the right track. I think out of all the alternatives, this is the way to go. It's the supportive part of ourselves where we pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, keep on going. You're doing the right thing. And that's what psychics do. Okay, they give us that sense that you know, we're not alone out there. That actually there's some kind of other energy or force behind us that justifies our position. Skeptic, on the other hand, is the part that says, you know, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think we can do this. Maybe we should just, you know, not try that. Maybe it's better to hold off. Maybe we should wait a little longer before we quit this job because, you know, it might turn around next week when the new manager comes in, and you know, so it's this kind of thing that we've got, whether we're supported, the cheerleader support, or whether we are kind of the disbelieving opposer. This is the faithful supporter here, part of ourself. That no matter what happens, part of ourselves said, you did the best you could. It wasn't your fault. You know, and get up and try again. Get back up on the horse. That's what this is. This is the part of ourselves that say, you could have been better. You screwed up. You always screw up. You know, it's that part. So it's not exactly optimism and pessimism either, but it's sort of being, you know, down on your case or boosting your case within yourself. And we both have those elements, and they fight among themselves. Okay? But they don't fight among themselves diametrically opposed. And they also don't ever agree. So what do? They throw things in the mix. Okay? A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and somewhere in there in that stew, you end up with a level at which you feel good about what you're doing. Okay? That's what these guys do. So that's the disbelieving faithful supporter and the disbelieving opposer. All right. Now we have this guardian and contagonist, and they form another pair, just like all these are pairs. They form another pair. Actually, we only got down as far as the guardian when we were first coming up with Dramatica. It was one of the first places we looked, is at character archetypes. And we found, oh yeah, we can see a protagonist in this story, an antagonist. Every story's got those. Great. Now we see a reason emotion character. And we see the sidekick and second character. They seem to appear in everything. Okay, cool. We've got something. Now we also have this character who kind of looks out for people and helps them and takes care of them and tells them what the right path is and educates them. And, you know, like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, you know, he's the guy who says, you know, this is the way to go. This is how you should look at things. That's your father talking, you know, or that's your uncle talking. This is what your father would have done. And he also, in a pinch, he's there to help, you know, like cut off guy's arm. We'll see examples of that in a moment in video, but that's what the Guardian does, okay? However, we started thinking, okay, so does that mean that now we have Darth Vader? Let's look at Star Wars, Darth Vader. Well, if Darth Vader is fighting with Obi-Wan, the Guardian, that shouldn't be, he should be fighting with Luke in the first one if he's the antagonist. And then that's when we realized that Darth wasn't actually the antagonist of Star Wars. The Empire's the antagonist with the Grand Moff Tarkin at the helm in Episode 4, which started it all. They'll see examples from that one here, is that Darth Vader is actually the henchman, okay? And that's when we first started calling it, oh, we got sidekicks, guardian, and henchman, okay? But then we realized this henchman character wasn't always with the bad guys. But what did he do? Well, he was a character who, unlike this one, who was helpful, and also he was kind of a force of conscience. It's interesting, the word conscience is actually conscience. Anyway, conscience, okay, this character here was a hinderer. Now, he wasn't diametrically opposed like the antagonist, where he was trying to prevent something. He was just sort of the fly in the ointment, the monkey wrench in the works. He was the guy that screwed things up. And we looked at Darth Vader and we said, yeah, he does that even with his own people. He's choking his own guys. Your lack of faith is disturbing, and chokes the guy. And we see examples of it all through Star Wars where he's just in there screwing everybody up on both sides because he's the hindering character. Very close, in a sense, to the trickster in traditional archetypes, but not really, because he's not in there to fool anybody, per se. He's in there by function. This is what he does. This is how he functions. Remember, as objective characters, they don't have to intend to do this. When we see him from the General on the Hill, it's not that he wants to create initiative. It's not that he wants to hinder people. It's just what he does. Okay, objectively, it's just their function. So again, we're standing back from characters about as far away as you can get from passion right now. We're just saying, how do these characters actually act? What roles do they have to perform in the structure? And this guy has to hinder. And he also represents temptation. In Star Wars, in case of temptation, the dark side, but represents the force of temptation. That doesn't mean that he's consciously trying to tempt anybody. He doesn't have to. He might, but he doesn't have to. He doesn't even have to be aware that he's tempting anybody. He just has to provide the image of something that is tempting to others, the icon of temptation. So often you'll see these will show up in stories as the little angel and the little devil on the shoulder, but that's always assuming temptation is a bad thing. Temptation just says, do what's most expedient now, and maybe you can avoid the consequences later. Guardian character says, you're going to have to pay those consequences later, so do what you need to now in order to make sure you don't have to pay them later. Don't do what's best for now, do what's best for later. And temptation says, do what's best for now, and later, deal with later. Okay? Sometimes one's right, sometimes the other's right. He who hesitates is lost. Haste makes waste. They're contradictory, but they're two truisms, because sometimes one is true, sometimes the other is true. So, in this case, do you do what's right for the present? You might, if you go with conscience, avoid a great opportunity right now. Losing sleep when you could go out to the premiere of a movie and you aren't ready to take your test the next morning. But what if you go to that movie and you meet somebody who turns out to be your lifelong soulmate? Well, then it was good that you went to the movie. But you have no way of knowing that. And you might get a decent grade on the test, you might not. But that would be what temptation would say to do. On the other hand, so Guardian would have been wrong in that case, because you would have lost something good. On the other hand, if you go with what the temptation says, and you go to that movie, it might turn out you're so tired that you end up not doing well enough on the test, and because of some new grading curve that they decided to put on this test, you're actually kicked out of the class and have to go another semester of school. So it was really screwed up, you see? So you never know which one's right. So take away, just like you take away the notion of a villain, having to be a bad guy per se, or that an antagonist is bad especially, because antagonist is just a function, okay? If you take away the notion antagonist is bad, take away the notion that temptation is necessarily a bad thing, and then you can see guardian and antagonist in a little clearer light. This guy's going to help you and tell you what's the best thing to do in context, and this one is going to hinder you, which may be a good thing to be held back. It could be useful to be held back when you run right into something that would screw you up. And also going to tell you what's best to do in the immediate situation, not necessarily in context. So, they're kind of complex. That's why our morality is complex. That's why within ourselves, when we feel what's right and wrong varies from individual, even though we have a general consensus of it. That's why we have courts of laws, because these things are so hard for us to deal with. And so instead of throwing things into the mix, like these do, where there are independent arguments, these kind of blend themselves together into an overall sense that you're edging towards something that's right or wrong, good or bad, okay? As opposed to seeing a mix of specific elements between these two. And that's kind of how the spiral happens in Dramatica when we're talking about characters. One example of it is that the relationships between those pairs and what they do changes a little bit.